Sometimes, life's most profound transformations come when we're closest to losing everything. When millionaire ranch owner Jack Morrison collapsed in the middle of nowhere, bleeding and broken, he had no idea that the humble farmhouse where he'd seek refuge would change not only his own destiny, but the lives of a struggling widow and her 3 children forever. This is a story of unexpected redemption, where wealth meets poverty, pride encounters humility, and where second chances can rewrite the future in ways no one could ever imagine. The Texas sun beat down mercilessly as Jack Morrison's luxury truck careened off the dusty back road, rolling 3 times before coming to rest against an old oak tree. Blood trickled from his forehead as consciousness faded in and out. The 45-year-old cattle baron, worth over $50 million, had built his empire through ruthless business dealings and an iron will that never bent to anyone. His sprawling ranch employed hundreds, his cattle roamed thousands of acres, and his name commanded respect and fear throughout the state. But none of that mattered now as he lay trapped in twisted metal, his cell phone shattered, no signal tower for miles. Hours passed before he managed to crawl from the wreckage, his left leg clearly broken, ribs screaming with each breath. The nearest hospital was over 60 miles away, and the main highway seemed impossibly distant. Stumbling through the brush, using a broken branch as a makeshift crutch, Jack followed a narrow dirt path that led to what looked like a small farmhouse in the distance. The paint was peeling, the fence posts leaned at odd angles, and a rusty mailbox read Martinez in faded letters. Sarah Martinez had been widowed for 2 years, ever since her husband Miguel died in a construction accident, leaving her with 3 children and a mountain of debt. At 38, she worked 3 jobs cleaning houses in town, taking in laundry and selling vegetables from her small garden at the local farmer's market. Her eldest, 15-year-old Elena, helped care for 10-year-old Carlos and 6-year-old little Maria while Sarah worked. The family lived paycheck to paycheck, often choosing between electricity and groceries, but Sarah's pride never let her ask for charity. When Jack's bloodied form appeared at her kitchen window that evening, Sarah's first instinct was fear. She'd heard about the wealthy ranch owner, his reputation for foreclosing on struggling farms, for buying out competitors through legal manipulation, for caring more about profit than people. But when she saw him collapse on her porch, human compassion overrode everything else. Despite having every reason to turn him away, she couldn't leave another human being to suffer. Sarah dragged the unconscious millionaire into her modest living room, her children watching wide-eyed as she tended to his wounds with the same gentle care she'd once given their father. She cleaned his cuts, splinted his leg with old magazines and kitchen towels, and gave him the only painkillers she had, aspirin from a bottle she bought on sale months ago. For 3 days, Jack drifted in and out of consciousness, fevered and delirious, calling out names of business associates and muttering about deals and deadlines. Elena Martinez watched the stranger with suspicious eyes. She'd grown up fast since her father's death, becoming the family's guardian when her mother worked late. She recognized Jack's expensive clothes, the Rolex watch, the soft hands that had never known real labor. This was the kind of man who made life hard for families like theirs. Yet here he was, vulnerable and dependent on their mercy. "Mama, why are we helping him?" she whispered one evening. "People like him don't help people like us." Sarah looked at her daughter with tired but determined eyes. "Because that's not who we are, Mia. We help because it's right, not because it's easy, or because we'll get something back." But even as she spoke, Sarah worried about the groceries getting thinner, the medical supplies they'd used, the time she'd lost from work caring for this stranger. She'd called in sick to 2 of her jobs, and her supervisor at the cleaning company had warned her about missing any more days. Meanwhile, Jack's employees and lawyers had launched a massive search operation. His disappearance had made headlines. Cattle King vanishes. Multimillionaire missing after business trip. Private investigators combed the highways, Helicopters scanned the ranch lands, and a substantial reward was offered for information. But the crash site was hidden by trees, and no one thought to look at the small farms and forgotten settlements scattered throughout the vast Texas countryside. As Jack's fever broke on the fourth day, he found himself looking into the faces of 3 children: Elena's defiant stare, Carlos's curious fascination, and little Maria's innocent smile as she offered him a hand-drawn picture of a horse. For a man who lived in boardrooms and measured relationships by their profit potential, the simple kindness of these strangers felt foreign and unsettling. He was accustomed to people wanting something from him, to interactions based on power and influence. But here, in this cramped house where dinner was beans and rice for the 3rd night running, he encountered something he'd forgotten existed: genuine human goodness without expectation of return. 2 weeks into his recovery, Jack overheard a conversation that shattered his assumptions about his hosts. Sarah was on the phone with someone from the bank, her voice strained and desperate. "Please, just give me 2 more months. I'm working as much as I can, but with Miguel gone, I understand you need your money, but if you foreclose, where will my children sleep?" Jack listened from the couch as she hung up, then sat at her kitchen table and wept quietly, thinking her children couldn't hear. That night, Elena confronted her mother about the overdue mortgage payments, the mounting bills, the repo notice on their beat-up truck. "We should have let him die," Elena said bitterly, nodding toward the living room where Jack pretended to sleep. "His kind destroys families like ours every day. Now we're going broke keeping him alive." But 8-year-old Carlos disagreed, whispering, "He said thank you when I gave him water today. Bad people don't say thank you, do they?" Jack's worldview began cracking like ice in spring. He'd spent decades convinced that people were either predators or prey, that kindness was weakness, that only the strong deserved to survive. Yet here was a woman sacrificing her family's security to care for a stranger, and not just any stranger, but someone whose business practices had likely contributed to the economic struggles of families just like hers. Sarah Martinez was everything his world had taught him to see as naive and foolish. Yet her strength in the face of impossible circumstances humbled him more than any business rival ever had. On his 3rd week of recovery, Jack's strength had returned enough for him to explore the small property. He saw the vegetable garden Sarah tended before dawn and after dark, the careful patches and mended clothes hanging on the line, the homework Elena helped Carlos with by candlelight to save on electricity. He watched 10-year-old Carlos carve toys from scrap wood with artistic skill that reminded Jack of craftsmen he'd hired for his mansion. Little Maria sang Spanish lullabies she'd learned from her grandmother, her voice pure and sweet in the evening air. But the revelation that changed everything came when Jack discovered Sarah's notebook, left open on the kitchen counter. Page after page detailed her budget calculations, her desperate attempts to stretch every dollar, her plans to sell her grandmother's ring, the only valuable thing she owned, to make the next mortgage payment. At the bottom of the last page, in her careful handwriting, were the words, "God, please show me how to take care of my babies. I'm trying so hard, but I'm failing them." The naked vulnerability and faith in those words hit Jack like a physical blow, forcing him to confront the emptiness that all his wealth had never been able to fill. Jack's internal struggle intensified as he grappled with revelations about both his hosts and himself. Every interaction with the Martinez family revealed another layer of his own moral bankruptcy. He remembered foreclosing on the Hendersons' ranch 2 years ago, a family with children who'd probably ended up like Elena, Carlos, and Maria. He recalled his lawyer's words, "Business is business, Jack. You can't save everyone." But now he understood the faces behind those transactions, the real cost of his success. The millionaire found himself studying Elena's fierce protectiveness toward her siblings, the way she shouldered responsibilities far beyond her 15 years. She reminded him of himself at that age, after his own father died, when he'd vowed never to be vulnerable or dependent on anyone again. But where his response had been to build walls and accumulate power, Elena channeled her strength into caring for others. The contrast forced Jack to question everything he believed about survival and success. Carlos became an unexpected mirror for Jack's lost childhood dreams. The boy carved wooden animals with remarkable skill, creating entire miniature worlds with nothing but imagination and determination. When Jack asked where he'd learned such artistry, Carlos smiled shyly and said, "Papa taught me before he died." He said that making beautiful things was how we fight against ugly things. Jack remembered his own artistic ambitions, abandoned long ago in pursuit of wealth and power. Watching Carlos work, he realized that somewhere in his climb to the top, he'd forgotten what it meant to create rather than merely acquire. Little Maria's unconditional acceptance proved the most disarming. She would climb onto Jack's lap without fear, chattering about her day, sharing her simple treasures, a pretty rock, a flower, a butterfly she'd watched in the garden. Her trust felt like both a gift and an indictment. When had he last experienced such pure, uncalculated human connection? His own relationships were transactional, built on mutual benefit rather than genuine affection. Even his ex-wife had admitted during their divorce that she'd married his money, not the man. Sarah's quiet dignity in the face of impossible circumstances became Jack's daily education and grace under pressure. She never complained, never showed resentment toward her fate or anger at the unfairness of life. Instead, she found joy in small moments: Carlos's laughter, Elena's good grades, Maria's songs. She thanked God for what she had rather than cursing what she'd lost. Jack, who'd built his identity on controlling outcomes and demanding respect, found himself in awe of someone who possessed true strength. The ability to remain kind when the world was cruel, to keep hoping when logic said hope was foolish. The crisis point came when Sarah received final foreclosure papers. She had 30 days to pay $15,000 or lose the house. That evening, Jack watched her explain to her children that they might need to move, that she was exploring options, that everything would work out somehow. Elena's tears of rage, Carlos's confused questions, and Maria's innocent faith that Mama will fix it, created a pain in Jack's chest he'd never experienced. For the first time in decades, his wealth felt like both a solution and a burden. He could save them easily, but would his help destroy the very qualities he'd come to admire? The night before the foreclosure deadline, Jack lay awake wrestling with the most important decision of his life. He could write a check and solve the Martinez family's problems instantly, but years of cynicism, whispered warnings, they'd become dependent, their children would learn to expect handouts. His gesture would ultimately corrupt the very virtues that made them special. Yet letting them lose their home felt like complicity in destroying something precious and rare in a world that had too little kindness. At dawn, Jack found Sarah in the kitchen, her face drawn with exhaustion and worry. She was making breakfast with the last of their food, humming softly to keep her spirits up. "I've been thinking," he said carefully. "I'd like to make you an offer, a business proposal." Sarah's expression grew wary. She'd learned to distrust when powerful people used words like proposal. Jack continued, "I need someone to manage a property for me, someone trustworthy. The job comes with housing, good salary, health insurance for your family." "What kind of property?" Sarah asked, her pride and desperation warring in her voice. Jack had spent the night crafting a lie that would preserve her dignity. He owned a guest ranch that needed a resident manager, someone to handle bookings, maintain the facilities, coordinate activities. It was legitimate work, he insisted, not charity. What he didn't tell her was that he planned to buy the ranch specifically to give her this job, that he'd ensure enough bookings to justify the position, that he'd structure it so she could never realize she was being rescued. Elena saw through the deception immediately. That afternoon, she cornered Jack on the porch, her dark eyes blazing with intelligence beyond her years. "You're him, aren't you? The millionaire who's been missing. I've seen your picture in Mama's newspaper." Jack started to deny it, but Elena cut him off. "Why are you lying to us? What do you really want?" Faced with her direct challenge, Jack found himself telling the truth for the first time in weeks. "I'm trying to figure out how to help without hurting," he admitted. "Your mother has something I lost a long time ago, the ability to do right for its own sake. I'm afraid if I just throw money at your problems, I'll destroy what makes your family special." Elena studied his face for a long moment before responding. "You think poor people are different than rich people, don't you? That we're more pure or something. But we're just people. We hurt. We're scared. We want our children to be safe and happy. The difference is, we don't have choices." "You do." Her words hit like a revelation. Jack realized his romanticization of their poverty was as condescending as his former dismissal of it. The Martinez family wasn't noble because they were poor. They were noble because they chose kindness despite their circumstances. Sarah's goodness wasn't fragile. It had survived tragedy, stress, and hardship. It could survive prosperity too, if offered with respect rather than pity. That evening, the foreclosure officer arrived with eviction papers. As Sarah signed the documents with shaking hands, promising her children they'd find somewhere to go, Jack made his choice. He revealed his identity, wrote a check for the full mortgage amount, and offered Sarah a genuine partnership. She would manage his charitable foundation, using her understanding of struggle to help other families in crisis. Not as his employee, but as his equal in a shared mission to use wealth for healing rather than harm. 6 months later, the Martinez family's transformation was remarkable, but not in the ways Jack had expected. Sarah hadn't become soft or dependent. Instead, freed from the constant stress of survival, her natural leadership abilities flourished. She'd restructured the foundation to focus on sustainable help job training, small business loans, educational scholarships, rather than handouts. Her first-hand knowledge of poverty's challenges made her incredibly effective at identifying real solutions, versus feel-good gestures that accomplish nothing. Elena had initially resented the upheaval, suspicious of sudden changes, and worried about losing her family's identity. But as she watched her mother thrive in meaningful work, as she saw Carlos able to focus on art instead of adult responsibilities, as she witnessed Maria's natural joy return without the shadow of constant worry, Elena began to understand that accepting help wasn't defeat, it was strategy. She threw herself into her studies with renewed focus, a sharp intelligence now channeled toward becoming a lawyer who could protect families like her own. Carlos discovered that his artistic talents were not just a hobby, but a gift that could impact others. The foundation sponsored art programs in struggling schools, and Carlos became both student and teacher, his wooden sculptures inspiring other children to see beauty as something they could create rather than something they could only wish for. His confidence grew as he realized that his contributions mattered, that he had value beyond being someone who needed rescue. Little Maria, perhaps affected least by the external changes, continued to be the family's source of light and laughter. But now her bedtime prayers included thanks for her friend Jack, who she decided was like the broken bird they once nursed back to health damaged when he arrived, but whole again when he learned to trust. Her innocent wisdom often provided the clearest perspective on the family's journey. Jack's transformation was equally profound, but more painful. Confronting his past required acknowledging the harm his ruthless business practices had caused. He liquidated several holdings to create a victims' fund for families he'd displaced, reaching out personally to make amends where possible. Some forgave him, others did not, and he accepted both responses as necessary parts of his redemption. He discovered that apologizing was harder than any business negotiation he'd ever conducted, but also more meaningful than any deal he'd ever closed. The relationship between Jack and the Martinez family evolved into something neither charity nor business partnership could adequately describe. They became chosen family, not bound by blood, but by shared commitment to using their combined resources for good. Sarah's foundation became a model for effective poverty intervention, while Jack learned to measure success not in accumulated wealth, but in lives improved and communities strengthened. As Jack reflected on that fateful accident, he realized it hadn't been a crash at all. It had been a rescue. He'd spent decades thinking he was strong because he needed no one, but the Martinez family taught him that true strength meant being vulnerable enough to both give and receive help. In saving them from foreclosure, he discovered something worth more than all his millions: a purpose beyond profit, a family beyond blood, and a peace he'd never known existed. Sometimes, he mused, you have to lose everything to find what actually matters. And sometimes, the greatest fortune isn't what you accumulate, but what you're willing to give away.